Okay, so now I'm going to bring in our guests. We're going to do a little interview, and then we're going to play some Call of Cthulhu 7th edition. Are you ready? I'm ready. My first guest is an award-winning designer and author, as well as the Grand Poobah of Paizo Publishing, creators of the Pathfinder role-playing game, a game I have played much and greatly enjoyed. This is all to say nothing of his secret life as an activist and avid collector of pulp magazines, sci-fi paperbacks, and all manner of apocrypha, esoterica, and occult writings. You can see some amazing images from his collection on Instagram at Erik Mona, ERIKMONA. That's right. Let me bring in our guest, Mr. Erik Mona, everybody.
Hello, Jared. Hello.
Hey, buddy. It's great to speak to you here. Right up. Yes. The SOBs, that's a little nickname I came up with for them. They love it. They love it.
I bet.
How are you, buddy? I can see your whole library there behind you.
Well, it's part of my library. The best parts are back. That's where all the Robert E. Howard and Edgar Rice Burroughs stuff is. But this is all my creepy occult stuff we're talking about tonight.
Yes, absolutely. We can talk about the Edgar Rice Burroughs another time. Actually, let me bring in. So we have a player here on the stream who's in almost all of the games, and I know you've met him already. But he's got a little bit of an occult library of his own. Every time we cut to him, he's reading some esoteric book. So rounding out our circle of magi, in addition to being an actor, world-class improviser, and our favorite role player. This is a man with his own occult library. Please welcome my pal, Mr. Ross Bryant, everybody.
Yes, hail. Hail. I had to, with that introduction, I felt compelled to snatch something off my paltry bookshelf. My collection, your collection makes mine just look like a occult coffee table. I also have to just say that you had a great slip of the tongue in that introduction, Jared, by calling his library amazing.
Amazing.
A coincidence that is probably not a mere coincidence, but proof of an unseen hand's providence in our world.
Thank you. And be sure to purchase the That's Amazing t-shirts that I'll be having printed this week. Well, what book did you grab off your shelf, Ross Bryant?
I know what book he grabbed off his shelf.
In honor of our guest, I when I saw that he was joining us, I went to that Instagram page where he posts just screenshots of the most incredible stuff that made me just drool with envy. But I was pleased to see that Game recognized Game, and that we both have a copy of this pulpy Satan's Disciples book.
Yes.
A modern history of Satanism and witchcraft through the ages, don't you know?
Wow!
In true Lovecraftian fashion, I pulled that out of an abandoned suitcase in a wretched Brooklyn flea market filled with the most despicable international crowd or whatever. But yeah, that's where I got that book. Yeah,
a very Lovecraftian description of Brooklyn right there. Well, let's talk about this. So when we say an occult library, what exactly do we mean, Erik? What do you have back there behind you, or what do you specifically try to collect?
Well, it's interesting. I collect a whole bunch of stuff. You can kind of see these two bookshelves on either side of me. This one over here is sort of my general Western occultism. And so that's like anything from Eliphas Levi, magic books, all the way to folklore and mythology and stuff, where it kind of intersects with the more esoteric. And so I've got quite a bunch of that. And then over here is my Theosophy section. So I'm very interested in the Theosophical Society, which is an organization that started about 1875, still around today. At various times has been quite occult in its philosophy, and very interesting to read about. It's been going on for over 100 years, so there's plenty to sink your teeth into.
Yeah, I did a little reading for this about Theosophy, and we'll get into that in a second. Because we could talk about that. We could start a podcast.
Sure, please.
You can talk about Theosophy for years and years, and you'd never be done. But I want to ask, how did you get into this? How did you start tracking down these books, and where do you find them?
Well, I find that, let me answer that one at a time. I guess I've always been interested in the beginnings of things. So I remember when I was a little kid, I was into Batman and Superman and the Flash and Green Lantern. And I got this oversized Treasury Edition comic book of All-Star Comics #1 from the 40s, which had a different Flash and a different Green Lantern. And I was like, as a kid, I was like, what is the deal? There's a Green Lantern before the Green Lantern I know. And so I wanted to learn all about that. Then I got into Dungeons and Dragons as a kid. And of course, in the back of the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide, there's the famous Appendix N. Here's all the pulp novels and stuff that went into the themes of D&D. I then made it kind of a goal to read through all of that stuff. And at the same time, I was growing up in the 80s, which was the height of the satanic panic. And so all these folks were saying things like D&D is a pathway to the occult. And I knew that wasn't true, but it sounded pretty interesting. So I thought I'd learn more about all that stuff as well, and I got a Ouija board, and I the first thing I ever got really seriously was this book right here, which is, there's many editions of this, but this is called An Encyclopedia of Occultism by a guy named Lewis Spence. I got this in 1996 at Magus Books in Minneapolis, one of the best occult bookstores in the country. And it's just, what it says on the tin. It's a big encyclopedia. You can see where I, in quite Lovecraftian fashion, have highlighted, key passages from my book here. But a lot of that then went into research for stuff that I was writing early in my RPG career. So one of my first books that I ever wrote was, my first professional RPG credit was as a continuity consultant for a Planescape D&D book called Faces of Evil that was all about demons. And so I was very interested in demons and devils. I was very interested in the section in Monster Manual 2 that just listed all these demon names, and I knew some of them were from mythology, so I wanted to know more about that. That led me to this book right here, which is the Gosha, the Lesser Key of Solomon the King. This is much more on the magic side of things, and so this has got all the different demonic seals of 72 different demonic entities, and I thought that was cool. I'm a heavy metal kid. I like horns and blood and tridents and all that kind of stuff. So this really appealed to me. And then I wrote a book called Armies of the Abyss for Green Ronin, one of the first D20 products that ever came out for 3rd edition D&D. Kind of did a bunch of other stuff along those lines and was really kind of heavily focused on that. Then through sort of osmosis, you learn about a lot of other things. A book I don't have handy, but it's a key reference, is a book called A Dictionary of Angels, including the Fallen Angels, by a guy named Gustav Davidson. And that then led me to the whole idea of angels. And in D&D, there's something called the monadic diva and the astral diva, and there's planetars and solar angels. Right. I knew that came from somewhere, but I wasn't really sure where it came from. And the answer 100%. Is... What's that?
Sorry to interrupt. The comments, the chat is noticing that I'm furiously scribbling away on my notepad so that I can build my Amazon.
I wrote down that I want that Encyclopedia of Occultism.
Yeah, that's a great one. And so anyway, so I just wanted to learn, like, what do words like monadic mean? Why is there a solar angel? Why is there a lunar angel? And that ultimately led me to this book, which I got. I think I got this at a thing called the Esoteric Book Conference in Seattle, which is now called the Mortlake Texts and Traditions Symposium or Colloquium.
The Mortlake Texts and Traditions Symposium.
And Traditions Colloquium. Sorry, it's not
Colloquium.
It's a series of symposia.
I'm writing that down for my next Delta Green.
It's run by a guy who runs a big cult bookstore out here in Seattle, which is where I live. It's an international annual gathering of basically book collectors, and then there's little panel discussions and stuff. And I, of course, spent a lot of time in the book collector section. So I got this guy. Not a great cover here, but you can see there, man, whence, how, and whither. So the title I got, I had to
Ross, that's just a sentence one of your characters would say.
Yeah. Oh, God.
I had to check this out. And so then I'm reading this book, and it's filled with what I could really only kind of describe as coded language, talking about different cycles of reality and bringing in a lot of Hinduism elements. And I was not, when I got this in 10 years ago, I was not prepared contextually to understand what the hell I was reading. And so then I started reading more and more. And then each book, I'm a bibliography fiend, so I'll read through, I bet I could find that on eBay. So the answer is I find most of my books on eBay abebooks,
Yeah.
is a real good thing. And then I just keep an eye out kind of every time I'm in a different city. I'll try and see if I can find a good old used bookstore. As time has gone on, my tastes have become a little more rarefied. So I'm mostly hunting down stuff from early, 20th century, late 19th century. And so nowadays I have relationships with like book dealers and stuff who'll call me from estate sales and things. And that's,
They'll say, I have
you
a
get that
copy
hooked
of the Ninth Gate.
yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly right. Yeah. So
Something you might
that's-
be interested in, Mr. Mona, has just become available.
yes, somebody's gonna get a hell of a phone call when they find my body in the bathroom or something. They're gonna
Right.
be able to just denude 20 years collecting in 45 minutes.
Looks like he was mauled by a mad dog, but how did it get in?
Well, it would have been my pug who will eat me when I kill it. So I think
Yeah,
that's-
they're like, oh, it's just the pug ate him after he
Yeah.
on a hot dog.
Some necklace beast.
Let me ask you, Eric. You say you're reading these things, so are they readable? Are can you sit and just go, I'm gonna pop open Ment's man whence came and with it or whatever?
It depends, right? I mean, the column over here has got a lot of like channeled manuscripts, so things that mediums wrote, like under the influence of some kind of, or at least they believed under the influence of some kind of entity, and those things tend to not be tremendously readable. I mean, they're, as you might imagine, someone just writing sort of stream of consciousness. They're interesting. They often contain cool ideas. Then you got another side of things, which are more like aggregating esoteric philosophy from a number of different sources. Those are generally pretty readable, usually heavily plagiarized from one another, which is kind of interesting. That's another thing that's worth thinking about, is there's a business behind all this stuff, and coming to it as a publisher myself, I'm kind of sometimes looking at like, oh, in their annual schedule, they're doing this, and this is the business model behind their correspondence course or whatever. And so, yeah, it all just kind of builds onto the point where you need a storage unit.
No, absolutely. Well, I mean, luckily you are lucky enough to have that nice, big, beautiful library behind you, which gives me good feelings in my nether regions. I'm so envious of that library. So, so some are readable, some are not. Let me ask you: have you ever tried to do any magic?
I think when I was a kid, I tried to play around with the Ouija boards. I did tarot cards and stuff like that. I'm not, I guess I would say I'm not a tremendously credulous person. I'm much more interested in the structure of belief than I am in belief itself. One of the things that appealed to me about Theosophy, in fact, was that it sort of says you don't need to be a Christian, or you don't need to be, a member of an organized religion to get into this. Over the years, that's kind of waned and waxed depending on who was in charge at the time and how popular they wanted it to be. You tend to see with some of these organizations, as they're doing essentially membership drives, they get a little closer to be like, oh no, Jesus is also in our, in our cosmology. You can find a place here. This isn't, and it makes sense, but it makes sense from like a marketing perspective. It's like, this isn't instead of, this is in addition to,
Right.
So
that's how QAnon works. They're like, JFK's alive, sure. UFOs, you got it. Don't want to vax your kids.
Not to get too dark and contemporary, but like one of the things that fascinates me so much about like learning about Theosophy is how, it is kind of, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, it seems to be the seed of a lot of both occult practices, but contemporary New Age thought as well. So a lot of the stuff that sort of feeds into a lot of this, a lot of the New Agey beliefs, thoughts, and practices that we see happening today, for good or ill, have their beginnings, their popular beginnings in Theosophy.
You can trace a straight line. I believe that Theosophy is essentially the flower bed from which the New Age movement kind of grows. New Age movement is a little bit more contemporary, generally speaking, a little bit more 20th century. Theosophy is kind of the late 19th century version. This is the time when Darwin's coming up with his theories. This is a time where science is looking like it's going to just destroy religion, and and people don't want that. They want to figure out a way to kind of have a structure of their belief and integrate. Yeah, and Theosophy itself, the motto of Theosophy being there's no religion higher than the truth. They're very interested in ancient wisdom. They're very interested in looking at all religions and all belief structures and kind of finding common. It's very almost like an exercise in comparative religion, syncretic religion, essentially. Yeah. And if you map that to the worlds that I create, say for Pathfinder or the Call of Cthulhu game, or even the Lovecraft Circle before that, where he's interacting with all of his writers and they're working with each other's stuff and they're patching it all together into a greater whole. There's almost kind of a fan fiction element to it. And by the time you get to man, whence, how, and whither, we're in full fan fiction territory. Blavatsky, Madame Blavatsky, who founded the Theosophical Society in 1875, she's dead by 1891. This book comes out in 1913. So we're on our second president. That's the Annie Besant, the writer here. Annie Besant is not a psychic. She does not have direct communication with the font of otherworldly wisdom, which every cult needs. I'm not saying whether Theosophy is a cult or not, but every organization that that's focused on this needs some kind of this guy's got the truth, or more frequently, this woman has the truth, right? So Blavatsky's dead. What does Besant do? Well, she gets C.W. Leadbeater, who is another mystic, kind of charlatan type of a character, if you ask me. And he starts saying, well, let's fill in the gaps here, Jack Kirby's dead, but if you look at all of his comics, we can fit stories in here, in here, and that's exactly what they're doing. And so back in the day, that all of a sudden they're talking reincarnation, they're talking Atlantis, they're talking all that stuff was in there before, but it wasn't necessarily the focus. But Leadbeater and Besant and the people who are following them make it the focus, and now all of a sudden it's getting weird. And eventually, a couple years later, they published this book again with all the weird stuff in it, And I mean, look here, I
let's look at an example of something weird in there.
Yeah.
Because so man, whence, how, and whither is sort of the secret wars of.
I think.
Okay, so show me.
Now we'll go into this in a minute, but this is all based around a character named Alcyone, which is a star, which is this kid named J. Krishnamurti, who at the time they're grooming to become the next Messiah, essentially the world teacher, the next great intellectual leader who will lead us to the next stage.
Every great movement, every great spiritual movement, you got to have a Messiah.
Right. You need your way to occult wisdom, like a medium or something like that, or prophet. And then you need the payoff, which is this is the golden child of our organization. And they had said it's going to be Alcyone, it's going to be J. Krishnamurti. And a lot of this book is about occult investigations where clairvoyantly they send themselves to what they call the Akashic record in the astral plane, which is a perfect record of everything that has ever happened. And they can look back at the past lives of themselves and this they call them the new Christ, essentially, the coming of the world teacher. And so here we go. Alcyone. Alcyone is chapter 9, Black Magic in Atlantis.
Right. That's a great chapter title.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. Alcyone is lying half asleep, half awake on a grassy bank sloping down to a rippling brooklet. His face is perplexed, even anxious, the reflex of his troubled mind. He is the son of a wealthy and powerful family belonging to the priesthood of the Midnight Sun, vowed to the service of the gods of the netherworld, whom the priests sought in the gloom of night, in dark earth caverns opening into passages that lead down into unknown depths.
I think you accidentally read from your Fritz Lieber.
Right, I know.
Yeah.
Actually, it's funny. What's his name? Henry Kuttner, who is a member of the Lovecraft Circle. He read some of this stuff and incorporated it into some of his lore. So that's why you've got your Blavatsky Book of Dizyan book in that Chaosium section, where they published.
Yeah. I actually wanted to ask you this, and that's a great tee up. Like, I feel like in my cursory readings of Theosophy, it's the joining together of all all world religions, the finding the common DNA that they share in order to find like kind of the religion, which the wisdom of which is brought to us by ascended masters. And there is this like what is referred to as like a white lodge of these masters or Mahatmas. But what you hinted to there, I'm wondering, like, a lot of time is spent on that. But in the sort of like in the Lovecraftian creepy way, is there in the sort of like Theosophist cosmology like a dark side? Is there a Theosophist?
Is there a Legion of Doom? Is there a Legion?
Definitely is. So, and it's crazy. Now, before I get into it, I got to be really clear about one thing, which is that they use a lot of like the white-black dichotomy stuff, white magic, black magic, all of that. So when they say, black magicians, they're not talking about African magicians or anything like that. So keep that in mind when you're talking about the Great White Brotherhood. They're talking about white as in pure and and not as in race and stuff. So, but you've got the Great White Brotherhood, which are the Mahatmas, like you said, the masters of ancient wisdom, and there were two in particular that were of great import to the Theosophical Society: the Master K.H., which is Kuthumi, and the Master M, which is Moira. They were the two that inspired Blavatsky to create the Theosophical Society, allegedly, and they're the ones who would write secret messages to rich and influential people to get them to get pulled into the organization to help fund it. And they were the one. Blavatsky was that font of metaphysical wisdom through the Masters of Wisdom. Now, they kept incorporating a couple of other people as well. So one of those guys that they incorporated was one of my favorite characters of all time, which is the Comte de Saint-Germain, the immortal, it's a 18th century French spy, jewel thief, mystic, whatever. So he's immortal. So he must have been one of these Masters of Wisdom. And then after Theosophy ends, that's when it doesn't end, but after this shit ruins Theosophy, they then start a lot of offshoot groups, and those groups then expand upon that ascended master cosmology and add hundreds and hundreds of different figures. And as each one of their medium who has the font of divine wisdom dies or moves on, then all of a sudden the organization shifts to someone else, and you see these organizations like adding other philosophies to get other cults to join their cult. And so you can draw a line straight from the Theosophical Society to what they called the I Am activity, the mighty I Am, which is a big thing in the 30s. And they worshipped essentially Saint Germain. Saint Germain was this god of America, essentially, that they worship. And they brought in, like I was talking about earlier, Jesus is like one of their ascended masters as well. And so then you keep going from there. That then goes in a couple of different directions. One is Elizabeth Clare Prophet's Church Universal and Triumphant, which you might remember from the 80s. They were amassing assault rifles in bomb shelters in Montana, waiting out for the apocalypse.
I am the violet flame of
right,
spirit and power.
I mean, that stuff is all from Theosophy originally, but you got to think of it more like post Chris Claremont X-Men is to Jack Kirby and Stan Lee X-Men, right? You've got multiple caretakers who keep looking back and keep adding and accreting.
Like, who do you want to be a secret master? We'll add them. Clark Gable.
And my favorite is that in the 50s,
Bunny, you got it.
In the 50s, they're like, well, what are we going to add? Well, why don't we add some UFO guys? There's lots of UFO cults.
Hell yeah.
So then they add, like, there's this thing called the Ashtar Command, where there's Ashtar, the alien ascended master. Like, it's all tied together. And that is very expensive as a book collector, because then you want to go, I got to go check some of that stuff. And so it all is kind of tied into a big web. And for me, Theosophy is kind of the thing that binds it all together. But Theosophy also has, in my opinion, a little bit of an aspect of it's a little bit it's very up here. It's a little bit boring. It's a little bit like, depending on who you read and what you think, it's like no sex and eat plants and don't have any fun and all that. And
in comparison to like
it takes itself a little seriously, right?
It's a lot seriously. But then
in comparison to like the Aleister Crowley stuff, that's kind of the same time. It's so unhorny in comparison.
So like rated G, Yeah. But then you get Charles Webster Leadbeater, who we won't go into it now, but let's just say very much not a rated G character.
Yes. I think I read this anecdote.
Yeah, and there's in these. So I've jumped around a lot, but this thing started in the Theosophist. This is a magazine. This one's from 1920. And there's an article series in here called Rents in the Veil of Time. And it was all like, okay, so Ross, we're going to say your name is Sirius. That's your star name. And Jared, you know, your name is, what's your favorite star? Beetlejuice, right? Okay, so Beetlejuice, Sirius. And in this, we're going back. I'm sending myself through the Akashic record. Okay, so Sirius is hanging out with Beetlejuice and Alcyone. And in this reality, Sirius is the brother of Alcyone, and Beetlejuice is their caretaker, and he's getting good karma for being their caretaker. But so now you guys can go back to your little theosophical groups and be like, did you know that in a former life I was the brother of the next Christ who's coming? And so everyone gets a star name. Each one of these things is like, oh, this, I'm guessing this person donated to the organization, and now let's tell you how he was Alexander the Great or whatever.
Oh, yeah, that's lovely. You donate, and then they tell you that you were like some incredible historical figure. Yeah, we are about to get into the game, but first I just want to talk about, there's one last thing we have to touch on, because I thought this was such an incredible part of the whole Theosophy saga. It's a little bit how it ended, or at least I think the Order of the Star ended, which was one of its branches. So we mentioned briefly, but there was a world teacher that Annie Besant, is that her name?
Annie Besant is how I think.
Yeah, and she raised raised this young man, Jiddu Krishnamurti, and a boy and then a man of Indian descent. She raised him to be the world's teacher, the coming messiah for Theosophy. And could you tell us a little bit about where that story went before we go into our game here in a second?
I can, because it's my favorite thing in the world. So this is the linchpin of it all. This is the collection of those Rents in the Veil of Time. It's a 2-volume thing called The Lives of Alcyone. It literally goes through and tells you like every incarnation with pictures, and it's amazing. So they're grooming this kid to be the new Jesus. And come 1929, he's going to speak at the World Theosophical Congress. All of the eyes of Theosophy are on him. It's been 18 years since he's a little kid. He started at 13. They've been building him to be the big world teacher. And here's where he's going to give his final lesson. And basically, he goes rogue in front of everybody, and it's so awesome. So here's just a quick quote of what he says. He says, "I maintain that truth is a pathless land, and you cannot approach it by any path whatsoever, by any religion, or by any sect. That is my point of view, and I adhere to that absolutely and unconditionally. Truth, being limitless, unconditioned, unapproachable by any path whatsoever, cannot be organized, nor should any organization be formed to lead or coerce people along any particular path. Truth cannot be brought down. Rather, the individual must make the effort to ascend to it. You cannot bring the mountaintop to the valley. If an organization be created for this purpose, it becomes a crutch, a weakness, a bondage, and must cripple the individual and prevent him from growing, from establishing his uniqueness, which lies in the discovery for himself of that absolute, unconditioned truth. I am concerning myself with only one essential thing, to set man free. I desire to free him from all cages, from all fears, and not to found religions, new sects, nor to establish new theories and new philosophies." So basically, the end result,
a mic drop speech
of the 20th century Messiah is: religion is bullshit. Don't look to other people. Seek the truth yourself. Cults are worthless. And then he's like, I disband the Order of the Star. And right here, I know we're running out of time, but right in this book, scrawled upon by some former occultist from the 1920s, is the official International Star Bulletin, August 1929. And you'll see on page 3, the dissolution of the Order of the Star. The following month, they all had to wrap it up. I have they're like, do you want to buy membership pins from the Order of the Star? They're real cheap now. So yeah, he just threw it away. And Krishnamurti himself went on to be a sort of a philosopher and someone who people followed his entire life. And he's such an interesting story. We could do a whole I read some of his other writings and speeches and things, and he is just a really interesting guy because he had such an interesting life. And that is wisdom, to have grown up with people telling you this thing and being able on your own to decide that you think it's kind of a lie and kind of, or at least that it's not your path, right? So
That was kind of amazing, and I just wanted to share that with everybody. You should look up his speech if you can find it, viewers. It's called "Truth is a Pathless Land." My favorite thing about the speech is that he kind of repeats himself a couple times and goes, "Look, if I'm being kind of blunt, it's because I want you to get what I'm saying right now, which is that this shit is over." Like, it's like,
well, and one of my favorite bits is, years later they said, well, it was cool how you went and renounced that you were the world teacher. And he goes, well, I didn't really do that. I never said I wasn't the world teacher. I just gave you my lesson, and whether you want to learn it or not, it's up to you. So interesting guy, interesting. The whole story is interesting. You can find out what it was really like in Atlantis, you guys.
And maybe we are about to find that out tonight, because we are about to play a game of Call of Cthulhu. Are you guys ready to hop right in?
So ready.
Do you have your percentile dice near at hand? Then I will send Ross Bryant off into the void, and we will spend some time with our friend Mr. Erik Mona.